please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL Hockey Pod Puckcast with Statsman and AJ, brought to you with the support from our pals at Owner's Box, with their new way to enjoy fantasy sports, and I'm having a ball with it. Friends, I'm Paul Bruno in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Schultz, who's a great follow at AJ Schultz24, back in the co-host chair in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Partner, we're 2 weeks into the schedule, and there have been some COVID-related impacts, 3 of them that I want to get your reaction to. In Washington, 4 star players, including Ovechkin and Samsonov, their number 1 goalie, are out after breaking with prescribed protocols, with the club being fined $100,000 by the league. In Dallas, there was a delayed start to the season, condensing their schedule right off the bat, also due to COVID impacting a number of their players. And finally, in San Jose, they have been pressed to move their home games to Arizona in the first week of February and possibly beyond, due to a sports ban in Santa Clara, specifically a contact sports ban that has been imposed there. So let me get your thoughts and welcome you aboard for this week, partner.
Yeah, glad to be back and talking hockey again this week. You know, I think the most interesting thing, let's not forget Carolina had a handful of games canceled as well due to COVID kind of outbreak there. And really, I mean, you're looking at a Central Division that's had games lost for Dallas and Carolina now. They are really going to be playing a lot of games. I've seen in many cases, you're talking about, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but like 50 to 54 games in about 100-day span. So really, a lot of back-to-backs upcoming for a lot of those guys. And so it's definitely tough. Look, as far as the Washington situation goes, you know, maybe this is hopefully a lesson learned for everybody around the league. Obviously, they had one player that ended up testing positive, but because they had, you know, kind of gone outside of the protocols, those 3 others had to quarantine. And, you know, we originally, you know, our news gets tweeted out on the RotoWire NHL Twitter page, and we had somebody immediately respond, "Wait, 4 games? You mean 4 days, right?" And we're like, No, we don't. We do mean, in fact, 4 games, and so it's a pretty significant impact for the Washington Capitals there. So, you know, it's important for the players to do what they can. You know, I always rely on the Penguins when talking about it, and Coach Mike Sullivan and the whole situation has talked about controlling the controllables, and, you know, not exposing or limiting your exposure as much as possible is a controllable. And that's going to be up to the players, the coaches, the support staff. I mean, that's everybody, the media people that are coming to games and stuff. And so you got to do what you got to do so we can, you know, have some hockey. And look, hopefully we'll have vaccines rolling out across both the U.S. and Canada here as much as possible. And we can, you know, get back to more a semblance of normal here soon.
Yeah, that fine really tells you how seriously the league wants the teams to take this. And you hope that while these 3 teams, 4 if you include Carolina, and let's do that, there's at least 27 other teams that are learning from the exploits of these other clubs, and hopefully they all take it seriously, and we don't have as many blips going forward, because we know that it can really be a disruption, obviously, and already we're dealing with a condensed schedule, and it's going to be ridiculous if it gets condensed much more than it is right now. In other news, AJ, there was a big trade. Formerly the 2nd and 3rd drafts in the 2016 NHL draft, they were dealt for one another last week. Patrik Laine moving on from Winnipeg and going to Columbus along with Jack Roslovic, and moving to Columbus in exchange, Winnipeg gets Pierre-Luc Dubois and a 3rd round draft pick in 2022. I have my own thoughts on this, AJ, but I want to hear from you first. Who won this deal, and what do you think precipitated it?
Well, I think it's fair to look at this and say that maybe this was actually a win-win deal for everybody. You've got 3 players, all of whom didn't want to be where they were at. Now, Roslovic was actually, in my opinion, the most vocal about that with not signing his free agent tender. He's actually from Columbus, and so he was in Columbus already when this move got made. So that was perfect for him. Obviously, we saw what happened with Pierre-Luc Dubois being benched for 2 periods of a game, and then they were going to scratch him for that next game if he hadn't been traded. Laine showed up and played really well opening night, but picked up an injury there. So all three players didn't want to be where they were anymore. So for these teams to work together with each other to resolve that situation, I do think is a win-win all around. Now, if I have to pick a winner, I'm going to give the slight edge to Winnipeg. I understand that Laine is a 40-goal scorer, and they expect that Roslovic could down the road push for a top 6 role as well. But look, top centers are not cheap, and they already have one in Winnipeg. So to get, a guy that on most other teams is going to be your number 1 center to be your number 2 behind Mark Scheifele, well, that's just an abundance of talent down the middle. They can use Paul Stastny as their 3rd-line center or move him to the wing. So really, I think overall Winnipeg probably wins this deal, though a lot of it I think will depend on what Columbus does in terms of a contract for Patrik Laine down the road.
Yeah, you mentioned the contract situation. Both of them are pending RFAs, so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for both players in their respective clubs. I expect them both to be retained, no question. Winnipeg comes out of this with great depth at center, almost unequaled around the league when you consider Paul Stastny is the number 3 now in that mix, and so they'll have the opportunity to really make nightmares for opposing coaches in terms of planning what to do against them. And I think you mentioned also Jack Roslovic included in the deal. Look, I project this guy to be a top 6 guy too, so that gives the Jets 2 top 6 guys in return for 1. And the concern that I have from the Columbus side is the center depth over there. Who's going to play at center with Patrik Laine? It looks like it's going to be Max Domi. And you and I both know, AJ, that in the last couple of years, Domi's been up and down like a yo-yo or a toilet seat. And consistency really been lacking in his game. And I think Laine needs that, or else he's going to turn into a Phil Kessel, a guy who has tons of skill, but really has not played with. Phil hasn't played with top centers on a regular basis. He's been a 3rd liner in a lot of his time in Pittsburgh, and in Winnipeg. Certainly, the talent pool is a little bit lesser than it was. I mean, in Arizona, it was less than it was in Pittsburgh for him, if I can draw that parallel. I think the same thing applies to Laine. The skill of the players around him is not going to be near his equal. So while there is some good depth in terms of guys that'll get you 30 to 40 points a season, there's no one guy that's going to be a driver that's going to be a dynamic duo partner for Laine, and that's my concern for him. Sure, he's a sniper that might be unequal, but I don't know who's going to feed him the puck, AJ, and that's a bit of a red flag for me if I'm looking at this deal. Look, man, our plan today is to give updates on each of the 31 teams as we always do. But before we go there, AJ, I know you want to give our listeners a reminder of our primary sponsor at Owner's Box.
Hey, NHL fans, Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They are the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination style format that keeps players engaged through live snake drafts, social interaction, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is there's no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests to keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts as up to 50% of users win money. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways. Add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to the next level. Think you have what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com and start making a name for yourself today. In honor of the NHL season, if you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/rotowire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
Okay, partner, this week I'll go first as we wind our way through each NHL roster with lineup and injury news and notes, as well as stats updates on some players that are going to be keys to your fantasy hockey planning. Beginning with the Anaheim Ducks, Josh Manson joins Brendan Gooley on the injured list. He's going to be out for a few weeks with a shoulder hurt. It looks like an oblique injury, rather, I should say. And so that means that the defense has been weakened, and that's a team that's offensively challenged. So that's a bit of a concern for me when the other side of the puck is now threatened. To give you a sense for some of the numbers, Danton Heinen, who's supposed to try and lock up a top six role over here, has not produced much offense at all. 1 assist through 6 games. On the back end, Cam Fowler, supposed to be their power play quarterback, or at least one of them, 1 point in 6 games for him. So that's an indication of the offensive struggles that they're dealing with. A couple of key players there that are not pulling the weight. And of course, there's some eyes on Ryan Getzlaf. He does have 3 helpers through 6 games, carrying a big price tag over here at over $8 million in the last year of that deal. And the veteran center has to do more scoring than 1 point every 2 games to lead this squad, AJ. Some concerns offensively for me in Anaheim.
Well, and that continues on to the back end, too. You talk about Kevin Shattenkirk brought in to provide some offense from that blue line, just 1 assist in those 6 games. And the other, overall concern, look, we talked about individual players that are having scoring problems. As a team, they're averaging just 1.83 goals per game through the first 6 contests. Somehow they still have picked up 6 points over that stretch with a pair of wins and a pair of overtime losses. And that's solely on the shoulders of John Gibson here. He's got a .938 save percentage. At some point, something's got to give. He's going to need some more offensive support here to get through it. We'll take a look at the Arizona Coyotes next. From top to bottom, pretty healthy in terms overall, other than the obvious Oliver Ekman-Larsson continued absence. They were talking yesterday that they want him to join them for their upcoming 6-game road trip, even if he's not able to play. And so that indicates to me that they're probably not really expecting him back over that stretch. Elia Labushkin is in Arizona finally. I expect him to push for a top one of the 6 spots on the blue line here once he finishes his quarantine. So we're still probably a week away from seeing him in action, but I expect he'll challenge a guy like the youngster Victor Soderstrom, who's in a 3rd pairing spot, or Jordan Orsoley, same on that 3rd pair. Labushkin will definitely challenge there on the front end. You've got pretty much the same group that you're used to: Garland, Schmaltz, and Kajula holding up the top spots here for the Yotes, rather.
And, there still has to be a bit of a concern on the blue line. They have to hope that Labushkin comes in and makes an impact, because Oliver Ekman-Larsson projected to be out for 4 more weeks. That's a big blow to their back end. And we mentioned Phil the Thrill off the top. He's off to a great start with 4 goals. I was surprised you didn't take that one, AJ, but I'll mention one of your favorite players in the league. In Boston, of course, there's excitement because David Pastrnak looks like he's just about ready to rejoin the lineup. He wore the regular sweater at practice yesterday instead of the injury-designated jersey, and that tells people that he's not far off. Projection is that he won't play in the next 2 games, but he should be available on the weekend. So owners of Pastrnak, you can plug him in right about that time. He'll be ready to go, I'm sure, and that means that Jake DeBrusk will lose the gig on the top line. And Jake Studnicka may move down a little bit too on the depth chart. He was given an opportunity, didn't really run with it to the extent that I thought he could, to threaten a top 6 role on an ongoing basis. But such is life. He'll probably get another shot. And the Bruins are trying to do a little bit of a makeover offensively. Nick Ritchie has been a guy a little bit more productive than he has in the past, and he's thriving on the left side of David Krejci. And that's a good situation for him, because Krejci is a very good distributor of the puck. And I like to highlight second-line centers, AJ, whenever I can, particularly as they're veteran types who can drive a second scoring unit. And Krejci's done that his whole career. So the beneficiaries going forward will be Ritchie and DeBrusk once Pastrnak lines up over there. The defense has had a bit of a makeover with the departure of Torrey Krug and Zadeno Chara, as we mentioned. Charlie McCoy's been tasked with being the power play quarterback. Not off to a great start yet, but we expect him to grow into that role, and really no competition for that role, as the fact of the matter is there's not a lot of offensive skill among that back end. Matt Grzelcyk might be the second guy, but he's listed day to day as well with minor injury at the moment. So the Bruins trying to flip things around from the veteran script that they've had in the past, by necessity with some departures, and some guys have got to deliver more than they have so far.
And one of those guys I think that does need to add a little bit more is Brandon Carlo, who's in the second pairing right now. I get this is not a guy you're expecting like Torrey Krug numbers out of, but more than one goal through the first 5 games here, maybe some assists really is what you're looking for out of him. He had 19 points in 67 games last year, and you would expect him to take a bigger role, especially as you mentioned with Grzelcyk out of the lineup. For the Buffalo Sabres, it looks like Carter Hutton is getting close to coming back and possibly being available. They moved Jonas Johansson down to the taxi squad. So that would indicate to me they're expecting Hutton to go perhaps as early as today. So that's good news for the Sabres as they kind of get their 1-2 tandem of Hutton and Linus Ullmark back. Not too many other injury concerns here. Offensively, there might be some people a little worried about the fact that Jack Eichel doesn't have any goals through the first 6 games. Look, that's not a concern to me. He's got 7 helpers. He's playing with a guy like Taylor Hall, who, Hall's got 1 goal and 5 assists. So, Eichel can just shuffle the puck around as far as I'm concerned to his line mates here, Sam Reinhart on the other side. So they're producing fine. Now, I will say a lot of that production is coming on the power play. So there might be some 5-on-5 concerns here. You look at Eichel, 4 of 7. Hall is 3 of 6, 3 of 5 for Victor Olofsson. You get the point right on down that most of their production is coming with the man advantage, which it feels like these guys can't win with us, right, Paul? We talk about one team, they're not doing it. Their power play is not producing. And then we get to Buffalo and it's like, only their power play is producing. But it's not a big concern, especially from a fantasy standpoint, right? You don't care where that production is coming from. Now, if you're a Sabres fan, maybe then it's a bit more of a concern.
Yeah, and the one guy that I'm a little bit spooked by is the poor start so far is Rasmus Daleen. No points in 6 games and a -5. He does have 19 shots on goal to show you that he's trying to generate some offense. It's just not turning into points at the moment, but I think he's going to be their leading scorer among defensemen when the season's done. So hang in there if you're an owner of Daleen. He'll get his game around to the scoring side of things righted very soon, I do believe. Jeff Skinner, though, continues to flounder, and that big contract is something we're going to probably talk about all year long. 1 assist in 6 games. I'm more concerned about him righting his situation with a depth role in the roster right now. They're not trusting him with significant minutes among the top 6, AJ, so that's a bit of a concern for me going forward in Buffalo. In Carolina, this is a team that has relied on a bit of a European or so Russian Finnish influence. Sebastian Aho, Teravainen, a dynamic duo in the league, has established themselves one of the top duos in the league, but Teravainen dealing with a temporary injury designation, as are a whole host of others on this roster. Warren Foegele, Jordan Martinook, Jordan Staal, Jesper Fast. I'm certain this is all COVID related, AJ, and Jacob Slavin on defense. So it's ravaged this roster, and teams that are playing them up next might be playing with the advantage of having this roster being very, very significantly depleted. And that's a bit of a concern because they figured to me to be one of the better teams in this division. But this challenge early on is probably a very difficult one that they didn't see coming.
Well, and it's a question, the league announced yesterday that today's game was rescheduled. No word on Thursday. So we're going to have to wait and see at this point, I think, whether or not they are going to play on Thursday or not. And if they don't, again, we're just further condensing the schedule for the Central Division. Really interesting that a lot of these have come all in one division. I think it's just mere happenstance. But it is unfortunate that it hasn't really been spread out. We'll dive in to the Calgary Flames. Just one kind of major injury concern for them. That's Dylan Dubé. Lower body injury, continues to not practice. And so I would expect he'll probably miss today's game as well, unless he shows up at the morning skate. Otherwise, pretty healthy lineup here. Jacob Markstrom continues to see the bulk of the workload. 2 1-1 in 4 starts for the team. He's taken all of the workload, in fact. So I would expect at some point, maybe this week, maybe next week, we'll get our first look at David Rittich for the year. But yeah, they're going to just ride Markstrom. When you bring a guy in to pay him that much money, it's not to sit on the bench. That is for sure.
Yeah, and I figured that Matthew Tkachuk wouldn't take long to make enemies around the league. He did make some in Toronto on the weekend when he conveniently landed with his knees on the back of a prone goaltender, Jack Campbell, late in the game there in a wild flurry around the net when Calgary was trying to get back in the game against the Leafs there. But this guy's going to drive people nuts, and yet he's still a very capable goal scorer, the kind of guy you'd love to have on your team, but you hate like heck to play against him. And tonight's tilt, the Leafs have brought up a guy, a feisty guy. We'll get to him later in the broadcast, but I think there could be some fireworks in Cowtown this evening with the rematch of that game. So something that I'm looking forward to. But in terms of the rest of the roster, Andrew Mangiapane has now established himself as a top six winger. He's off to a bit of a slow start this year, though, with only one assist and a -2, playing alongside Elias Lindholm and Matthew Tkachuk on a revamped second line. They're swapping back and forth, actually, first and second line roles. And keeping an eye on Dominic Simone, partnered with Sean Monahan and Johnny Gaudreau. That's a good situation for him because that's another dynamic duo, one of the top ones in this division for sure as well. They're trying to stretch the roster, too, by developing a third scoring line. Sam Bennett and Michael Backlund driving that alongside Josh Levo. So I like the forward depth here, but I'm a little concerned about the back end, AJ, when I think Mark Giordano, they're relying on him to carry big minutes again, and he's getting a little long in the tooth at age 38, I believe, and partnered with Rasmus Anderson, tasked with being a first line of defense there. Chris Tanev, a heck of an addition. This might have been one of the sneaky good additions in this division going forward, and it could make his partnership with Noah Hanifin a real solid duo there. I feel better about them than the first pairing, actually, AJ. And then from there, it gets a little bit weaker than for me. Juuso Valimaki and Nikita Nesterov, both a little bit challenged in terms of the scoring side of the game, and hopefully they're going to be able to handle the defensive responsibility that might come with shadowing some of the other teams' top secondary duos of scoring, let's say. And I too am wondering, when are they going to put Big Save Dave back in the lineup? But the big signing here was Markstrom, and he has to be counted on to play more of the games here, I guess, going forward.
So next, go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead.
All right, for the Chicago Blackhawks, a bit of some injury concerns there in terms of the overall lineup. You've got Adam Boqvist is in the COVID protocols. Alex DeBrincat, same status there. So some obvious concerns losing those guys when you consider they're already without Johnny Tejas and Kirby Dach. Look, the head of our hockey department here at RotoWire is a huge Blackhawks fan. He is loving everything he's getting out of Pius Sutter in that first line center role. I believe he was kidding when he texted me that Sutter was going to walk away with the Rocket Richard Trophy this year, but you never know. Maybe he actually believes that. No, I'm kidding. He's coming off a hat trick in that game against Detroit, so a real solid outing for him. And maybe that'll kind of adjust some consistency for him. Obviously, he's been thrust into a spot that he was going to be nowhere near if this was a fully healthy team. Carl Soderberg, I would imagine, will start to move up the depth chart a little bit here after getting just his first game after quarantine period in time. So there's going to be some shuffling to continue with this lineup. We have to see when DeBrincat and Boqvist will be able to come back. So for now, it's Kubalik, Sutter, and Patrick Kane on that top line, and it really gets shuffled up from there, and it will continue to be. So you're going to need to check those depth charts at rotowire.com to figure out where these guys are playing.
Yeah, right now they've got a guy named Philip Kurashev on the second line with Dylan Strome. Keep an eye on him because good situation with another good puck distributor who will avoid top checking from the opposition. Carl Soderberg, another good puck distributor in the middle of the ice. So while they have a lot of youngsters sprinkled into the roster, I like the second and third centers here to give the Hawks lineup a bit of a longer look in terms of depth in the offensive side of the game. Defensively, they're going to be challenged all season long, and that has more to do with the goaltending inexperience. Kevin Lankinen also figures to be in the mix because they're trying to find an answer back there too, AJ. Why don't you take us back in order now and lead us off with Columbus again?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the trade, and that's going to be the biggest thing here is what they do down the middle of this lineup. You mentioned Max Domi going to get the first crack at the center role. We're not going to see Patrik Laine tonight. He should be back sooner rather than later. But I would imagine that he is going to take a few days in terms of getting up to speed and quarantining and that stuff. Now, I mentioned that with their other acquisition there, Roslovic, he was already in Columbus and he was on the ice yesterday. So he's not playing tonight. And I think that's more of just a practice time and fitting in with the new system. He's not crossing the border, so there's no visa kind of quarantine issues there. So he'll jump in, I think, immediately into a top six. Laine figures to take that first line role. But for now, what we'll see is Nick Foligno, Max Domi, Cam Atkinson across the top, and then Boone Jenner, Alex Texier, and Oliver Borkstrand. Texier being the big driver of their offense right now with 3 points and 2 assists. I think this team overall maybe addressed the situation as best that they could, but you were right on, Paul, earlier when you said the depth down the middle is just a huge concern now.
Yeah, and one guy they might be looking to help on the wing, actually, in terms of what I saw in the playoffs last year. Liam Foudy is back off the depth chart into a third line role here after being on the taxi squad for earlier on. But I think he has a bit of a skill set that lends itself to the offensive side of the game. And I can see him certainly threatening a top six role on the left wing, because that's been a revolving door. They're looking for an answer there. Nick Foligno's played anywhere from first to third line and tasked with first line responsibilities. I don't think he's ideally suited there. So Foudy has an opportunity to leapfrog him and Boone Jenner on that left flank, in my opinion. Oliver Bjorkstrand and Cam Atkinson, a nice look on the right side alongside Patrik Laine on the depth chart on the right wing. That's a lot stronger for me. So the left side and center depth concerns when I look at it. The back end, troubling news for the Jackets, because Werenski and Jones, they've stumbled out of the gate in terms of offensive totals so far. And they're one of the best pairings on paper in the last couple of seasons. When you look at the offensive contributions that they've made on a regular basis, it just hasn't been coming yet, but it will. Don't fret. I put them in the same camp as Daleen of the Sabres. They'll get it going before too long. One of the teams that has no problem getting it going offensively is the Colorado Avalanche, partner. And the top line intact again. McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog. There's no injury designations among any of the forwards here in Colorado. So that's a great sign for them that they haven't got to deal with that in the early going, when last year it really dogged this club all season long. And interesting note, at center, they have moved JT Compher ahead of Nazem Kadri in the depth chart, according to you and our team at RotoWire. AJ, maybe you can answer that situation or address that situation for me to see what you guys see in that circumstance. And Valerie Nachoskin remains an intriguing prospect for me on the right side. I mean, size, skills. I'm waiting to see if this guy can put it together. Right now, they're giving him the third line role. Maybe that's why they put him with Kadri, to have him light a fire under the talented right wing. He's been an enigma for me since he came in the league, because on the face of it, he looks like an uber skilled guy, just hasn't put it together yet. Maybe this partnership will get the best out of him.
Yeah, I don't have much in terms of, maybe why they're putting Kadri in that spot, but that is what we've seen coming out of, reports for practices, that they've got Kadri down on that third line with JT Compher ahead of him with Brandon Saad and Andre Burakovsky. I have to say this is definitely one of my favorite second lines in the league, definitely one that I like to use in terms of, stacking and whatnot in my DFS contest. So we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later, maybe a tip of my hand there. But it's really an interesting situation. I would imagine that second line center spot is probably fluid at best, and I can only see that changing more often than not. Speaking, of fluid situations, the Dallas Stars have had to be pretty unique in getting their practice time in, with a number of guys out and unavailable. Obviously, they're still without some big name guys in Ben Bishop, Tyler Seguin, Blake Como's on IR now. Joel Kiviranta, their kind of playoff darling, he's also on injured reserve. So they've dealt with more than just that kind of COVID designation. Jamie Benn has a lower body injury. He missed their opening night game, or rather their second game against Nashville. So Some shuffling around again for them. Jason Dickinson set for a first-line role with Rupe Hintz, Dennis Gurianov, Joe Pavelski, Alexander Radulov, Andrew Cogliano. Look, that's probably not actually their second line. That's just how they list it, and that's how we put it on our site as well. But if you're asking me which is the first line, I'm definitely going to take Pavelski and Radulov as that first line. Anton Khudobin will continue to carry the bulk of the starts with Bishop out. They at least have some good news. John Klingberg is back and available. So on the back end, they're at least relatively healthy, other than continuing to miss Stephen Johns at this point.
They looked so impressive in their first two games, though, didn't they? Boy, oh boy, filling the net with some power play efficiency that you don't expect early on in the season. So while it's a tough start schedule-wise, they have answered the bell, winning their two games in fine style. In Detroit, this is a Red Wing team that I expect bigger things from them as the season goes along. The youngsters starting to get a little more regular ice time on the top six. Tyler Bertuzzi, Dylan Larkin, obviously the leaders offensively, along with Anthony Mantha, but you're starting to see the impact of some of the other youngsters. Michael Rasmussen, Matthias Brome, they're challenging for top 6 minutes. Bobby Ryan, feel-good story, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money on him and spend a lot of DFS opportunities his way, because I think it was a spark that I don't think he's going to carry all season long. Relegated now to a third-line role, that's probably where he's probably best suited here, away from the pressures, and certainly giving way to some of the other younger guys to take hold of opportunities. But really, a lot of these guys, too, also listed with day-to-day situations that keep them out of the lineup in the next little while. Philip Zadina, Robbie Fabry, Darren Helm. That's just three of about 6 names on the forward ranks. And then on the back end, John Merrill listed as day-to-day, probably a depth option they'd like to see in the lineup on a regular basis when healthy. But Patrick Nemeth being the insulator for Philip Hronek, that gives the youngster a chance to freewheel. I have a lot of time for Hronek's game, AJ. I think he's going to be a linchpin for this power play for years to come, and I think I'd like to get a hold of him if I had the option in dynasty leagues, for sure, in Detroit. That's going to make some of our friends in the home office smile. I'm optimistic. There's a lot of Red Wings fans around you back there, so I had to throw them a bone. In the nets, Thomas Greiss and Jonathan Bernier. This is where Detroit really got it right for me, AJ. A veteran partnership in the nets. While there's so much uncertainty ahead of them, it's a really good foundation block, I'll say, for the development of this team going forward. And these two guys, I would trust them to carry the mail and keep this team in games more often than not going forward.
Well, that's a bold call. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to say that they're going to keep them in games more often than not, but we'll see how that plays out. You know, I think the guys that are going to keep them in games are the ones at the top of their scoring list. Dylan Larkin, 3 goals, 3 assists. Bobby Ryan, 4 goals, 1 assist. Tyler Bertuzzi, 3 goals and 2 assists. So really, these guys, I think, are the most likely to keep them rolling and in a good spot. Speaking of guys continuing to roll, Edmonton, you know, they've got Leon Draisaitl. Has been unstoppable to start the season, 9 points through the first 7 games. You know, that's obviously a big boon to have a player of his caliber just start the season off on an absolute tear. McDavid surpassing that with 10 points in those 7 games after a bit of we talked about it last week, a little bit of a slow start for McDavid. You know, had the one big game against Vancouver, but otherwise was a little quiet over the course of the first week. That has obviously changed. He's got 3 helpers the last time out, a goal against your Maple Leafs, which I'm sure you saw, and you at least got the win there. So, you know, that's kind of the best of both worlds, right? You get to watch Connor McDavid. He gets a goal. It's kind of nice to watch, but then your team wins anyway. I think that's the best combination.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing.
But overall, you know, really a pretty healthy team when you factor in that Oscar Klefbom it won't play this year. He's really the biggest loss for them on this team. I know Mike Smith is still unavailable, but I figured he was probably at best going to split the starts with Miko Koskinen. So you really haven't lost a ton there in terms of that. So a very healthy team that is clicking on all cylinders offensively right now.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of cylinders that are coughing a little bit. Jesse Puljujarvi, AJ, they brought him over after his stint in Finland to rehabilitate himself. I've not seen anything different. He still hasn't bulged the twine. Only a couple of assists so far, despite the fact that he's got a lot of time in the top six. Dominic Cahoon, a guy that you know a lot about, also struggling to hit the net. He's partnered with Draisaitl and Yamamoto. Yamamoto, a spark plug for this team, and really fits in nicely alongside Draisaitl. But there's two holes on the top six that they need to fill. And Zach Kassian might soon get a regular turn. He was getting some time with McDavid's unit earlier on against the Leafs, I'll say, and I figure he can get back in that role if Puljujarvi continues to struggle much longer. So keep an eye on that situation as well. And then as the net minding, Miko Koskinen playing every minute for the Oilers. I think they got to turn and give Skinner a chance just to give Koskinen a breather in this condensed schedule. I don't think you can insulate him forever, and I'm waiting for that opportunity to see what the kid has. So we'll see what that situation unfolds and looks like. In Florida, this is a team that also relies on one of the top dynamic duos. They've separated them, though. Barkov and Huberdeau now split again to try and drive the top two units. Anthony Duclair, a very skilled winger, has not really found consistency in his game yet in Florida, coming off a nice season last year. Carter Verhaeghe, I think he's miscast as a top six winger here, AJ. And I look for the likes of Frank Vetrano and maybe even Vinny Hinostroza to climb up the left wing depth chart. There's a bit of uncertainty on that left side. Not so much on the right side, where they've got the veteran Patrick Hornquist and a highly touted youngster Owen Tippett on the right flank that give them some depth and a nice look on that right side. On the blue line, Mackenzie Weegar partnered with Aaron Ekblad. I look for him to develop into a consistent offensive defenseman eventually, but only 1 point so far in his games this season. Keith Yandel is a guy that passed a milestone with the 100th goal of his career not so long ago and continues to have that iron streak intact. Has come off a 2-point game last week, so the offensive side of his game is still there, and I like the fact that they have two guys that can drive the offense from the back end in Yandel and Ekblad. Sergei Bobrovsky continues to be an enigma for me, AJ. Starting the season with a .381 goals against average, albeit in limited action, one game, and didn't look very impressive in that one, in my opinion, despite turning away 32 of 36 shots.
I agree with you. Initial reaction on Verhaeghe being on that top line, I'm like, this seems like it doesn't fit. But through the first two games, he's got 2 goals and an assist. So, I mean, it worked in the first two. So we'll see how long it lasts. If he can hold on to that spot or not, I think it's going to depend on him continuing to produce. Now, I agree with you, Paul. I think the initial gut reaction was maybe this, I don't really understand why he's there, but so far so good for them. And maybe that, maybe Joel Quenneville knows what he's doing.
I'm just not sold yet, AJ, is what I'm saying. So I'm not buying what they're selling right now with that lineup.
No, and I agree with that. So, for the Los Angeles Kings, I think at least me personally, I thought we'd see a little bit more of some of their youngsters, like an Alex Turcotte, playing in the lineup. He hasn't been available due to an injury. They have a couple other young guys that aren't really factoring in that they sent down to the minors and whatnot. So a little surprise there, but Andreas Athanasiou, I think, is part of the reason. He's got a real strong start to the year, but he's been held without points in the last 2 games, and I think that's a little bit more indicative of what we'll see out of him. I doubt he's going to keep up the point per game pace throughout the year. He'll dip off a little bit, I think, but still a viable fantasy option, filling a top 6 role for them. Jonathan Quick, 2 wins is in 2 games in 4 outings, no in regulation losses. So, I mean, nothing to complain about when you're getting out of him. I get the goals against average is a little high at 3.15. Save percentage is below 900 right now. But again, he's coming up with the wins and 2 wins, 2 overtime losses. That's plenty of points, and probably more points than some people thought the Kings would have at this point. That's for sure.
And by necessity, they're having to spread their offense and veteran leadership up front. I like what they've done, putting Kopitar, Carter, and Dustin Brown on 3 different lines to insulate rookies and youngsters. Blake Lizotte, Gabriel Velarde, these guys are going to be looked at to carry some of the offensive load down the middle of the ice, and have started off fairly well, offensively at least. Athanasiou, you mentioned 3 goals earlier on, but dried up in the last little while. He's going to be their star attraction, I think, among this offensive group going forward this season. So I look for him to get on track again very soon. Question marks abound on the back end, though, for me. It's Drew Doughty and a cast of unknowns, really, because Olli Määttä, you knew this was coming, AJ. You knew better than most that he's sunk down to the bottom of the depth chart already. So that leaves Mikey Anderson, Kyle Clegg, Matt Roy. See what I'm talking about? There's not name recognition here. That's because these guys are not worthy of it yet. They haven't done much. And so they need that group to step up to carry their share. Otherwise, it's going to be a long season in LA. And the guy who will be hampered the most by that is Jonathan Quick, who I think should apply for a Purple Heart right away. Now, Minnesota Wild, AJ, this is a team that, like I said earlier in the season, I no longer put a big X through this offense because it's looking a little more dynamic, and that has a lot to do with the arrival of Kirill Kaprizov. I think this guy's a contender for the Rookie of the Year award in the NHL if he continues the early trajectory of his season. I just like the fact that I've seen a lot of highlights involving him, and he seems to be a real driver of this offense. And that makes a pretty dynamic 1-2 punch on the right wing with Kevin Fiala, who was a lock to be a DFS dynamo in the second half of last season. He seemed to produce every night. And so that's a dynamic look on the right wing. Concern for me is in the middle of the ice, no longer can they rely on the veteran leadership that has departed in the middle. And so they look to the likes of Nick Bjugstad and Nick Bonino, a guy I think, in Bonino's case, again, miscast as a top 6 center. I'd like to see him in the 3 slot, maybe flipping with Joel Eriksson Ek, but until he gets his game in order, that's the way they lay it out right now. On the back end, that's the strength of this team, AJ. We've talked about him at length. The quartet of Suter, Brodin, Spurgeon, and Dunbar. I'd put that quartet against almost any in the league. And then question mark in the net with Cam Talbot listed as day-to-day. That means maybe we'll see some of Kaapo Kähkönen going forward.
Well, I definitely think there are some concerns there without Talbot, just because of how good he's been so far, but they do have that stalwart defensive group to help. And I love the acquisition of Ian Cole to that back end. I think he, really kind of helps stabilize that in terms of a defensive guy in that third pairing. They were going into the season with, Petherin, maybe Carson Southey, maybe Matt Brakowski. And I think Ian Cole really solidifies that and is a good addition for a team that already was coming from a position of strength when it comes to that back end. So that should hopefully help kind of ease the burden here. But I do think they are going to need Cam Talbot to avoid being out for too long, because if it is a lengthy absence, I think that's just a lot to throw at a guy like Kähkönen without too much NHL experience. Paul, we'll get to your favorite club now, the Montreal Canadiens. I know how much you love seeing them atop the league standings right now. I'm sure that the conference standings. I'm sure that makes
It's early.
Well, look, I think this is the team to watch right now. You look at the goals per game is 4.83 through their first 6 games. That's only exceeded by Dallas and Florida, who are averaging 5 goals per game, but those teams have only played 2 contests each. So Montreal is getting plenty of production, and let's not forget they got Carey Price between the pipes. So this is a dangerous team. They've got a bit of a hang-up with Joel Armia picking up an injury, but that didn't really change much for him as they put Corey Perry into the lineup, and he scored right away. So everything just coming up roses for them right now. It's going to be a question of whether they can hold on. But the fact of the matter is the offense doesn't need to be as good as it is right now when you have Carey Price between the pipes.
Look at you selling Carey Price. If any other goalie had a save percentage of 89.3 or a 315 goals against average, you'd say there was some trouble there. I'm going to be the one that says it, AJ. This guy doesn't look like he's been as steady as he has been in the past. but it's early on. I expect the veteran to get his game in order, and that's going to be another feather in the cap of this team, which I admit looks very dangerous right now. I just want to make sure that you tell the truth about Carey Price, AJ. There are some holes in the game at the moment. I got to get that shot in. But look, at Jake Allen has looked like a very steady acquisition he figured to be, and he's delivered the goods early on. So very nice looking tandem in the nets. And look at the depth chart on the back end. Jeff Petrie now, he's no longer a secret, is he, AJ? He's right there as the leading offensive piece on the back end, and partnered with Shea Weber in that regard, of course. And Alexander Romanov, this guy looks like a 10-year veteran already. So the right side of that back end, we highlighted that would be the strength of this team on the blue line. And then up front, Danault, Suzuki, Kotkaniemi, that's a very nice 1-2-3. But Jake Evans has given them a viable option as a fourth center with offensive upside in the early returns so far this season. Tyler Toffoli, this guy must be disappointed that he doesn't get to play Vancouver every night, because he was lighting it up when they faced them on a regular basis, haunting his former West Division rivals. But Jonathan Drouin also figuring in on the scoring, and that's exciting news for Habs fans, because this guy has been troubled since the time he set foot in Montreal. But 6 points in the early going this season also solidifies that top six. Josh Anderson is proving me wrong. He's also a guy that's fitting in like a glove on the right side, giving them a very nice look with two feisty guys at the top of that depth chart, Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson, filling the net and contributing offense, but as well as being physical forces for this team. That's not something I said too much in the past. Montreal was not known for their physicality, but with the addition of Anderson and Toffoli, they have addressed that, and Corey Perry is the third guy that fits that bill as well. Next up, the New Jersey Devils. This is a team that is hoping for the further development of Jack Hughes. I like what I'm seeing out of him this season. He's contributed more offense than he has in the past, but his running mate was expected to be Nico Hischier, and all of a sudden it looks like Hischier is going to be out for, well, he's probably close to returning and making his debut, AJ. So that's some good news around the corner for this club that needs offensive sparks from anywhere they can find them. If they can get these two guys rolling, that should be a nice 1-2 punch at center. Igor Sharangovich is a bit of a surprise revelation to fit into the top six here on the left wing. He's got top line responsibilities alongside Hughes and Palmieri on the right flanks to give them a decent look on the top line, but it's filling in the depth chart below that has been a troubling spot in Jersey. Miles Wood is a guy that could be a consistent scorer given a regular role, and he's getting a chance now as second line left wing. Ditto for Jani Hukonen. So these are really dress rehearsals for these guys with the serious shooting, and wonder what we can expect from them going forward, AJ. I don't know what your opinion is of them, but I don't think they're really bona fide top six types yet, but could be the best of the lot in Jersey, and that's a bit of a problem for me.
I would agree with that. I think they'll maybe develop into the future and move forward, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Andreas Johnson being down on their fourth line, no points yet in 5 games. That's a concern to me, when the fact that they brought him in to be potentially a challenger for a top six role, and so a lot of concern for me with him. And then obviously the back end. Scott Wedgwood had a shutout his most recent outing, so I don't want to knock him too much. But I think the first game that Wedgwood played, in which he gave up 4 goals on 35 shots, is probably more on par with what they can expect out of him. They're going to need to get Mackenzie Blackwood back sooner rather than later. He had a good start to the season, 2 wins right off the bat for the Devils. We'll look at the Nashville Predators next, and I'll continue with the goalie conversation here. A bit of a surprise to me. I know we've talked about it transitioning to UC Saros, but the fact that Saros has started 4 of the 5 games, I think, is a bit more than I anticipated. He did get the hook once, so we've seen Pekka Rinne at least play in 2 games, but he's only gotten 1 start, and I'm definitely surprised by that. I thought we'd see a little bit more even division of labor here between these 2 guys, but clearly the time for Pekka Rinne has passed in Nashville, and they're moving full bore ahead with UC Saros. As far as the offensive production goes, you're getting what you expect out of the top line. Philip Forsberg, 4 goals through the first 5 games. Victor Arvidsson is the guy giving him the puck. He's got 1 goal and 4 assists in those 5 contests. Luke Kunin, 2 goals. So, really that's maybe your concern, is that Luke Kunin is your 3rd highest scorer. You look at cost of point per game. So how much is a team paying for every point? And the leader in most expensive cost per point in the league right now is Roman Josi, who has cost them just over $9 million for 1 assist, surpassing the $9 million flat that Jeff Skinner has made for his 1 assist, and the $9 million flat for PK Subban's 1 assist. So there are some guys making a lot of money right now for not a lot of points, and Roman Josi is ahead of the pack there, and that's definitely something that they should be a little worried about.
Well, you know what? The concern for me continues to be what it was last year, AJ, and that's the fact they're paying about $16 million for 2 centers who between them haven't scored yet this season. Ryan Johansson, Matt Duchene, each with a pair of assists in the early going, but they haven't tickled the twine either so far, and that's a big, big issue here, because other than that, there's a lot of pieces that are in place around on the wings here. So I think those 2 centers, it's been a long time since they've produced regularly, and so maybe this is who they are. But if that's the case, they've got them on the books for a while, and that's really going to be an albatross around Nashville's entire look if these guys don't get untracked. The New York Islanders up next. This is a team that is a sneaky one, AJ. You can't take them lightly because they'll check you into the ice, and they have some talent on the forward ranks when you consider Matthew Barzal, Anders Lee, and Jordan Everly, a very nice top unit over there with some young veterans who can play at both ends of the ice. Ditto for Brock Nelson and Josh Bailey. Anthony Beauvillier is nicked up a little bit, listed day-to-day, so they hope to get him back in the fold on a regular basis going forward. They've stretched their offense to a 3rd line with Jean-Gabriel Pageau's arrival last season, and so that gives them a nice look offensively, and the defense is solidified, as we always say, with one of the better shutdown defensive pairings of Ryan Pulock and Adam Pelech. Pulock has emerged as one of the top scoring defensemen in the league as well. So a nice look at the top end of the roster, but it's the bottom end that kind of makes a bit of a difference, even though they do it on a quiet basis when you consider that they've kept the 4th line intact. I haven't seen this anywhere around the league, AJ, but it's been years when they featured Matt Martin, Casey Cizikas, and Cal Clutterbuck as 3 whirling dervishes on that 4th unit. It's fun to watch if they're not playing against your favorite team, to see what these guys can do on a nightly basis just to make things interesting.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed through the first, start of the season here is that the long-awaited Ilya Sorokin debut, everything's going to be great for us moving forward. Islanders fan base is not working out so far through the first 2 games. Now, I get there's a transition time, no real training camp, so I'm not saying it's doom and gloom. He'll never be a good NHL player, but 2 games, 2 losses, and a .875 save percentage to show for it. Meanwhile, you got Semyon Varlamov has given up 1 goal in 3 games, stopping 81 of 82 shot attempts, .988 save percentage there. I think they need to maybe consider not splitting the workload up as much as they have been, and maybe rely on Varlamov a little bit more. On the other side of New York, we've got the Rangers, who have moved Alexei Lafreniere up into that first line role with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. That did not take long for him to supplant Pavel Buchnevich on that top spot. Now, is he going to stay there the entire year? Probably not. I would expect you'll see this in and out, but for his part, Buchnevich has just 1 assist in his last 3 games. Not the type of production you want out of a guy that's supposed to be on the top line. Artemi Panarin on the other side of that line, he may be a bit of a concern. No goals in his last 3 games when you consider that he is a goal scorer, but 4 assists over that stretch, so not too concerning in my opinion. They do have one kind of injury in Philip Cheadle. He is out right now with an upper body injury. No good indication yet on how long that's going to be, but that's going to stretch their depth down the middle. He had a good start to the year. and was really gelling as that kind of third line center for them. 2 goals, 1 assist through the first 5.
You remember it wasn't so long ago they wrote a letter to their fans in New York saying it's going to be a painful rebuild. Well, it's looking like it could be an exciting one if the teenagers get untracked, and I think they will before too long. You talked about Lafreniere. I mentioned Capo Caco, a couple of points so far this season, but I'm looking for him to be a breakout candidate at some point, more than Lafreniere on this roster, just because he has the reps under his belt. He's relegated to third line minutes at the moment, but I think he's going to get a chance to move up and certainly be featured on the power play. So really a dynasty option, in my view, dynasty league option if you're looking that way. You could do a lot worse than stashing Capo Caco if you haven't done that already. Lafreniere is going to be just fine too. This guy is got tons of skill, and he's just getting his feet wet. It's very early on, so don't be discouraged if you're an owner of his thing. When is this rookie hotshot going to score? He will, and he'll score plenty, and he's in a very good spot right now with Kreider and Zibanejad. On that back end, the concern for me is that Jacob Trouba is being relegated behind Adam Fox on the depth chart on the power play, and that's limited Trouba's offense. 1 assist so far to his record. When they landed him in New York, I thought this guy was going to be the linchpin of their back end, but he is maybe in danger of moving even further down that depth chart when you look at the fact that they have other youngsters that they have faith in, including Anthony DeAngelo, who's held that role in the past. So for me, the ownership of Trouba makes that contract look a little suspect at the moment in the Rangers depth chart, and that's another concern. In addition to the others that we have with the youngsters and their inability to score so far. The Ottawa Senators up next. This is a team that I figured would give teams fits. So far, the only team they gave fits is my favorite club. They got shelled last night against Vancouver, AJ, 7-1, and I think they have to get that memory expunged as quickly as possible, because that's the kind of defeat that could lead to a long losing streak. The way they got dismantled in that one, Matt Murray was shockingly in the nets for all 7 goals there. I thought they might pull him and give him a bit of a break, but they didn't, and so he has to wear that one on himself. Looking up front, I'm kind of surprised that they put Josh Norris in as the top line center with relatively inexperienced wingers too, in terms of Tkachuk and Batherson. But Norris, for his part, has 4 points so far, -2 on the season. That's despite that 7 spot last night. I guess he didn't wear too much of that himself. But I would have rather seen them mix it up with some veterans in the middle of the ice in the top 6. Instead, they've put Chris Tierney and Derek Stepan on the 3rd and 4th line roles. Artem Anisimov, he's been a second line center before, and he's getting a chance to do that again, hoping to get more out of Evgeny Dadonov. Maybe that's the partnership they figure can work with a puck distributor like Anisimov and a finisher like Dadonov, I think is the rationale there. Nick Paul on the left side of that second unit, also looking good in the early returns. Tim Stützle back in the lineup. And this is a highlight reel waiting to happen, Stützle. In the clips of the games that I've seen, he's been spectacular, AJ. And once he gets his footing in this league, he's going to be a star for a long, long time. So the pieces are starting to come together offensively in Ottawa, but it's going to be a long year, and they're starting to show why when they match up rather poorly against some of the other Canadian clubs, as we suspected that they would.
Well, I had a buddy text me last night and basically like, what the heck is with Matt Murray? 7 goals allowed on the year, 3 or more goals in all 5 of his appearances. Obviously this team has no faith in Marcus Hogberg, because why wouldn't you put him in at that point, right? With Murray getting shelled, I was surprised that they didn't pull him, and really he's had a bad start to this season. Look, at some point this guy lost all confidence. It looked like maybe it was coming back a little bit prior to the shutdown last season, but I don't know what it's going to take to turn him around, and maybe it never will, which would be really unfortunate, because you look at his numbers the first 2 years in Pittsburgh, this was a great netminder, and there's a reason that they decided to go with him over Marc-Andre Fleury and let Fleury be exposed in that expansion draft. He looked like the real deal, but I don't know if he needs the competition of a veteran guy like Fleury pushing him. It didn't seem to do much for him with Jarry challenging him last year. He kind of just rolled over in a lot of ways early on in the season. So I'm hopeful. Everything that I've read, Matt Murray seems like a very nice guy, a very community oriented guy, and I hope that he can figure this out and get back on track. But I'm not real optimistic, and I would definitely be worried. If I'm an Ottawa fan, I know there's so many other things to be worried about with this team. But it's concerning to see the guy that I think you maybe thought at the start of the year, okay, revitalize everything, he'll get back to where he needs to be with the change of scenery, and that just hasn't been the case. I'll continue with the goalie theme, talking about the Philadelphia Flyers. Carter Hart, great start to the year, pair wins over the Penguins. What more could Flyers fans be asking for out of that one? But it's taken a bit of a sour turn for him after those first 2 games. 3 losses in a row, has given up 4 or more goals in each of those contests, including that most recent one where Boston shelled him to the tune of 6 goals allowed on just 26 shots, a .769 save percentage. And to that end, we are going to see Brian Elliott between the pipes for them tonight. His numbers so far to start the year have been pretty decent. You consider he's, two games played, just 1 start, but a .964 save percentage in that outing. And so I think they're probably going to give him a few more opportunities here, and that includes tonight's contest. They've got the offense to show for it. Kevin Hayes, 8 points, Travis Konechny, 7, Jacob Voracek, 7. So they got to do something, and unfortunately, Hart is struggling a bit after those 2 wins to start the year.
Yeah, and another guy who's struggling is Erik Gustafsson, AJ. I thought this guy was going to be at least a second pairing defenseman on this club, but you're listing him 4 deep on the RotoWire depth chart. And that's where he's been slotted behind the likes of Robert Hagg and Travis Sanheim on that left side of that defense. So that shows you the kind of depth that they have here in Philadelphia. But this is one guy that has an offensive upside to his game that I thought would translate into moving up into that grouping. And another guy who's getting more minutes than I thought is Shane Gostisbehere. He is tested positive. I got my notes mixed up. He tested positive for the COVID, so he's going to be out for a while longer still, it seems. Let me go back to guys that are playing. Mark Friedman is a guy that stepped up in class the last 2 games, starting to get longer look. Justin Braun as well. But that defense should have been a strength of this club, AJ, and it's reflected in Carter Hart's numbers. That defensive side of the game is lacking in Philadelphia right now. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. It's starting to look like resemble the club that we lamented for years when they didn't get their goaltending sorted out. It was about all their offense. And one of the brighter lights among the offensive mix is Nolan Patrick. He's got 4 points in the early going this season. That could be the feel-good story of the year in Philadelphia. It seems like they have one each of the last couple of seasons, with Oscar Lindblom being the guy that recovered from his cancer scare last season. So hope that Nolan Patrick's return is as successful as it can be, because this guy was a top pick in the NHL draft not so long ago and had some serious issues that limited him physically and in day-to-day life, actually, for the last couple of seasons. So a remarkable comeback for him, and he's writing a very nice story in Philadelphia there. Now we get to your favorite club, AJ, and I'll let you wax poetic in just a second here. But I think the returns are fairly positive, if the way I look at it. And I'll leave it to you to dissect it in a little more detail. But the goaltending tandem of Jarry and Smith has been challenged from time to time. Jarry wearing a .429 goals against average, and Casey DeSmith, on the other hand, a little bit better at .276. I don't know who has the upper hand going forward, but I'm sure when the season started, you were hoping that Jarry would be the number 1 of the number 2. I don't think there's a goalie controversy here. They figured to split the games fairly evenly over the course of the season, but you must have some feelings one way or another on that. Cody Ceci parlaying some recent success into moving up the depth chart. Bit of a surprise for me that they're giving him second line minutes alongside John Marino. He is not a guy that I trusted in Toronto, and I wonder what your observations are of Ceci. And as well, I'd like you to comment on Kasperi Kapanen's fit on that second line with Malkin and Zucker now. He's been moved off the line with Sidney Crosby. Crosby back with more familiar partner Brian Rust on the right side there, and Jake Gunsel really emerging as a serious shooter on the left wing. I'd like the look of the left wing on the Penguins depth chart, AJ, with the 1-2 slots going to Gunsel and Zucker, recent acquisitions by this club that solidify this team alongside the two legendary centers.
Well, I just want to point out that you are the one that asked me to comment on a number of situations. So when our listeners get annoyed that I spend too long talking about the Penguins, just remember you asked me about Kapanen, the goalies, and Cody Ceci. So I'll start with the netminders here. I think there's not a ton of concern. Yes, Jarry had a pair of bad outings to start the year, but he's looked better. He's never actually faced the Washington Capitals, which I think, with him struggling in those first two games, they decided to go with DeSmith in the first one and then just said, hey, you know what? DeSmith is the guy that seems to have the Capitals number. So it'll be interesting to see with 6 more games this year against Washington, does Jarry get any of those or not? Or do they ride Casey DeSmith whenever they're playing Washington? So that's one to definitely monitor. In terms of Cody Ceci, look, he started the year as a healthy scratch, but they've had a number of injuries here. Mike Matheson is week to week. Marcus Pettersson is out. Juuso Riikola is out. And that has forced them to move Cody Ceci up. They brought in their young prospect, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, to fill out that lineup here alongside Chad Ruhwedel. And I think the biggest compliment that I've seen people use for Joseph over and over again is that he hasn't been noticeable through his first 2 games. What better compliment for a young defenseman then, he hasn't stood out, so he's obviously not doing anything wrong there. As far as, rounding out the forward complement, look, we never actually got a chance to see Kasperi Kapanen on that top line. He had it took him a while to go through quarantine protocols, so they eased him in on the 4th line and then moved him up to the 3rd at one point. But Evan Rodriguez is now going to be out long term, and with Rodriguez hurt, they moved Rust into that first line, and I think he's going to stay there. Kasperi Kapanen now will slot into the second line as a kind of rounding out that group with Rodriguez injured long term as well. I'll end my Penguins comments there, and we'll talk about the San Jose Sharks. Not a lot to talk about in terms of injury concerns here. The biggest kind of thing that they've showed off the hop here is John Leonard is getting first line responsibilities. Started out strong with 2 assists in his first game, but he's been blanked in the last 5, no points over that stretch. He's getting plenty of opportunities with the power play, which I think is a bit surprising here. It's almost 2 minutes a game over that stretch. So they're doing everything they can to try and get him going and give him every opportunity to succeed. But I have to imagine if this slump kind of continues any longer, you're going to see him get bumped out of that top spot by somebody, perhaps Ryan Donato. Offensively, it's the names that you expect for them. Tomas Hertl with 7, Evander Kane with 5, Brent Burns with 4, Logan Couture with 4. So not a lot of changes there. Maybe even they consider moving Patrick Marleau into a more prominent role. He continues to fill a 4th line spot, just 1 assist through 6 games. But look, I think all Patrick Marleau really cares about at this point is just being in the lineup and racking up those game played as he tries to track down Gordie Howe.
Yeah, that's certainly a game watch that they probably have a sign up in the arena telling the number of games played there. But you didn't mention Timo Meyer. This guy's been a top 6 fixture in San Jose, and I think with Leonard's struggles, I could see him climbing back into that top role. and or Donato, but Leonard's really in jeopardy of losing that top 6 situation after floundering over the last 5 games, as you suggested. I want to highlight Brent Burns as a guy that might be ready to challenge to be one of the top scoring defensemen once again. He's off to a very nice start with 4 points to date, looking really engaged and logging a lot of ice time as usual. But I'm a little more concerned by Erik Karlsson. 3 assists on the docket, but really not. I can't say the same about looking as engaged as Burns has to date. And so that's a big ticket item that they need more from on the back end. These guys both figure to be top 10 scorers among defensemen in the league, but I know I'd bet more money on Burns in that regard than Karlsson. Let me just say that. The St. Louis Blues up next in our consideration. This is a team that figures to be one of the juggernauts in their division, and so far, so good, I'll say. The mix is very familiar in terms of most of the key pieces up front. Jordan Kyrou is a guy that they hope to round out their top 6. He's off to the races with 6 points so far. A bit of a surprise contributor that we didn't forecast, but right now he's locked in and looking really good alongside Braden Shen and Jaden Schwartz on a very experienced and good-looking second unit. We wanted to see what the fit would be for Torrey Krug in defense here. He's been a little bit slow in terms of the offensive contributions with only 2 points, but a +2 means that he's not hurting this team at the other end of the ice either. I look for him to emerge as a prolific scorer. Justin Falk will always wear the Alex Pietrangelo departure. He's got 2 goals to show for his record, but a nice +5, so he's probably feeling better about his game than he was at any point last season. So there's some positive signs to report from newcomers to this fit mix here, veteran and youngster that I've highlighted so far. Binnington doing what Binnington has done since he started in the league, playing regularly, playing well. But I want to see what they've got in Ville Husso. We haven't seen much of him at all this season, and at some point he's going to have to spell the youngster. He didn't look good in his first appearance and was drilled for a goals against average. That's 7 so far this season, so far in his 2 appearances. 9 goals against, not looking good there. He has to right that. Otherwise, those are points lost that could be the difference that makes St. Louis a third-place finisher in their division, as most people forecast.
I absolutely agree. It's a concern when you don't have another option, but I think you just, Binnington's young. He's in his 20s. Just roll with him. Just let him see as much workload as he can take. Obviously, you don't want him to get hurt, but I think they're going to have to just give him as many games as he's willing to take on. I think if there's one surprising thing for me about these Blues, it's that Mike Hoffman slots in as the third on the third line here, and his production shows for it. 1 goal, 1 assist through 5 games. That's not why you bring in Mike Hoffman. Mike Hoffman comes in to be almost a goal every night guy, every other night kind of guy for you. So I'd definitely be a little concerned about not only his production, but his spot in the lineup as well. In terms of the Tampa Bay Lightning, much more of the same for these guys. They just continue to steamroll through the league, and no reason to expect them to not continue to do so. Yes, they've only played 4 games, so a little bit less because of some cancellations, but 3 wins in those outings, and they're using their main guy, Andre Vasilevsky, has played all 4 of those contests, and so maybe a bit of a silver lining for them if they were considering going with a backup option here to spell him. He got a free game off tonight with that cancellation. So he'll get the opportunity to rest up and should be ready for Thursday's game. And I expect to see this team continue to produce at the same level. They've got the offensive pieces, even without Kucherov in the lineup. That hasn't really slowed them offensively that much anyway. Stamkos 6 points, Braden Point 5, Victor Hedman 5 as well. So really just not much to knock on the defending champions, and they're going to make every run at the repeat performance here.
Yeah, and they've added in a piece that was a high draft pick not so long ago in Cal Foote. So the rich are getting richer, and he's getting his feet wet behind the championship roster here. I look for big things from him once he gets his footing. So No pun intended there. I guess I did that unintentionally, AJ. Curtis Mcelaney, former Maple Leaf, worth a mention in the fact that he is dealing with the COVID symptoms. And so they brought up Chris Gibson to be their backup. At some point, they're going to lean on their backups here. And that'll be a telltale sign to see if they can hold up their end of the bargain behind Vasilevsky, who I figure will be a workhorse for this club. When I looked at the schedule, AJ, we both looked at it and thought, geez, I wonder if there's any top goalies that will emerge as real to continue with the same rate of games played that we've seen in the past. I think you can say that Vasilevsky and Conor Helibach still at the head of the class. We'll get to Helibach shortly, but bears mentioning that I revised my view on the goalie usage because I think without the hectic travel schedules with the 2 or 3 games in each city, that makes it a little bit more realistic to say that you'll see goalies play multiple games in a row more readily than we might have anticipated at the start of this campaign. All right, we get to talk about the 5-2 Maple Leafs. That's why I've been smiling throughout this episode, AJ. My team's off to a very nice start, and last game might be symptomatic, though, of some things turning a little bit when I consider that 2 of the 3 goals the Leafs scored were not actually shot into the net. They were kind of deflections and kind of cheap-looking goals. But I have a lot of faith in this high-octane offense. And Mitch Marner is leading the pack in terms of scoring productivity. He looks engaged and motivated. That was something that he freely admitted that he didn't have when the games were played in the playoffs last year. He's come with a different mindset, and the team is better for it. And one of the beneficiaries is the guy that plays on the opposite wing from him on Matthews' line, and that's Jimmy Vesey. He's got a couple of goals and looks like a real nice fit on that top 6 on the left wing behind Zach Hyman, who's back and cast in the role that I'd like to see him in, playing top 6 minutes as well on the left side with the likes of Tavares and Nylander. That duo has been sensational since the beginning of the season. So the Leafs blessed with 6 players who really are well suited to the top 6 of their lineup, and that affords them to play the likes of Wayne Simmons and Ilya Mikheyev around Alex Kerfoot, who looks faster than he did last season to me. So the top 9 really engaged and looking good for Toronto. And on defense, Morgan Riley looks like the Morgan Riley of old, coming off a 3-assist game. He figures to be easily in the top 10 scorers among defensemen, and forming a good partnership with TJ Brody, who looks more comfortable of late. Freddie Anderson, after a bit of a suspect start, looked better in the last couple, and Jack Allen doing what no Leaf backup goalie's done in years, and that's record wins in the first 2 starts that he's got so far this season.
Yeah, unfortunately, if that injury turns out to be anything severe, it's going to be back to Michael Hutchinson.
Bite your tongue.
So I agree, though. I will say, Paul, you were very quick to point out that Carey Price had a sub 900 save percentage, but conveniently left that stat out when talking about Freddie Anderson and the second place Toronto Maple Leafs here. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll move on to the Vancouver Canucks.
Nice. Shots fired.
With the Canucks, I think if there is a concern for me, it's maybe a bit of the offense here in terms of Elias Pettersson with just 1 goal, 1 assist through 8 games. You definitely want more out of him. No concerns out of Bo Horvat. He's got 10 points in 8 games, so no slowing him down. And here's a guy, that hits all the boxes, right, Paul? He's got 6 of his points at even strength, 4 on the power play, so he's producing in all areas of the ice. Quinn Hughes has 7 points. So really, I think for them, it's just a matter of getting Pettersson going. I don't know if they need to shake things up or not to kind of get him fired up, but I really wouldn't want to mess with that second line too much. You've got the rookie Nils Höglander, has 2 goals and 2 assists as well. He's taking on a pretty prominent role for this club. And I like everything they're doing. It's just going to be a matter of putting it together and in all pieces. And it's going to come down to Pettersson. I think that's where they're at. They could obviously get some better play out of Braden Holtby. He's got just a .888 save percentage right now. Thatcher Demko has been even worse in terms of the goals allowed. They need to get better there. But if they can't get Pettersson going at some point here, things might start to drop off for the rest of the lineup, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on a couple of guys on their blue line, AJ. Nate Schmidt and Alex Edler. Nate Schmidt figured to be a really good fit, and I like him partnered with Edler on the top pairing there. But it's down the depth chart. Ole Ulivi finally getting a look. See, this guy was a top draft pick here not so long ago, and finally making the grade. And if he can find his way, I think this guy's got an offensive side to his game that's worth watching. Jordy Ben, a very nice foil for Quinn Hughes on the back end. We know that Quinn Hughes is a run and gun type, so a steady stay-at-home guy like Ben, key to his success as well. So keep an eye on that pairing. I think it's a nice fit. They will suffer for the absence of Travis Hamonic. He's out for a couple of games on the IR, and that's a blow to their depth on the blue line. I'm also a little bit concerned for Braden Holtby. We've talked about several goalies, some veterans around the league. He sports an unsightly 370 goals against average and a sub 90% save percentage. So while you highlighted Freddie Anderson with a cheap shot, I'll throw Braden Holtby in there. There's another veteran goalie who's off to a bit of a slower start than the Leaf stalwart. So there you go. Let's go on. Now, next up, we got to go to the Vegas Knights. This is a team all hitting on all cylinders, AJ. I like what I see out of this squad. They've got that goaltending tandem that we figured to be a real boon for this club. And so far, both of those guys more than holding up their end of the bargain. And Shay Theodore, I thought he would have to take a bit of a backseat to Alex Pietrangelo. You have to like what he's delivering offensively with 6 points already this season. So he's not really ready to cede the top scoring defenseman situation to the newcomer Pietrangelo, who was given an A to show that he's considered part of the leadership core and very highly respected here as well. So nice 1-2 punch on the back end there in Vegas. And they've got a ton of experience around them. So very solid looking on the back end. And offensively, Chandler Stevenson making a case to be included when we talk about top six types here. He's got 3 points in the early going and gets the plum assignment between Stone and Pacioretty going forward. So pretty sneaky good DFS value play the way I see it. The second line long-term has been intact for Vegas. They've been there together much of the time since this franchise started. Willie Karlsson, flanked by Riley Smith and Jonathan Marchessault, solidifying a top six that's among the more formidable in the league. From there, it's a bit of a drop-off, though. They've got Nicholas Roy, Keegan Colasar, and Alex Tuck, probably the best known and best producer among the bottom six types here. They would like to bolster that group, I guess, if you're looking to prick little holes in this depth chart. That might be the one weakness that I see.
Well, I would also point out, Chandler Stephenson as the top center. I think that's a position that maybe they need to address is to get deeper at the center position heading into the rest of the season. Maybe a trade that can happen here. 1 goal, 2 assists through 6 games. So the numbers aren't terrible, but you would expect somebody playing with Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty to have a little bit more oomph behind them. I guess I would say that. Yeah. You mentioned the netminders. Look, they've gotten probably the best netminding tandem in the league. When you talk about the fact that Robin Lehner is 2-1, a 2.68 goals against average, and he's the worst of the 2 goalies. Marc-Andre Fleury, 3 wins and 3 starts, .951 save percentage. He's just been dominating right now, and they'll continue to split those guys. So I would expect we'll see Robin Lehner tonight, though no, as far as I know, unless something's changed, we won't get any confirmation out of them until that they hit the ice. The goaltending situation in Washington is a little muddled right now, with Ilya Samsonov on the COVID list there after contracting COVID-19. Vidiq Vanisek has taken the load for them, and they've had a pretty busy time here of late. They went into extra time with Pittsburgh in his first start of 3 in a row, then back-to-back extra time sessions with the Sabres, 1-1, lost 1. So he's getting plenty of work, which I think means we should probably expect to see Craig Anderson here at some point. Like I said, with Samsonov out for at least another 2 games, they'll also be without Kuznetsov, Ovechkin, and Orlov for those 2 contests. Tom Wilson also picks up an injury. So there's a lot of missing guys in action right now. Wilson is kind of a doubt for tonight. As it stands, we'll probably see Vrana, Backstrom, and Oshie making up that top line. But again, a lot of that will depend on whether Tom Wilson can play tonight.
Yeah, you mentioned with the likes of Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, and Wilson out, that means that they're going to press into service Connor McMichael, a young 19-year-old. He's going to get second-line minutes alongside Lars Eller and Richard Panik, 2 veteran guys who can move the puck around. So could be a cheap DFS value play the next time this team suits up to look at Connor McMichael if he gets that role, though Carl Hagelin is behind him, and I could easily see the veteran making for a trio of vets on that second unit. So keep an eye on the way we show the lineups before their next start. Zadeno Chara playing second-line minutes with Justin Schultz, doing what Zadeno Chara does. He's a very disruptive defenseman defensively, but we want to highlight the offensive types in this roster for DFS purposes and fantasy plays. So we got to talk about John Carlson. He's got 5 points so far, -1 on the plus-minus side there, so a bit of a suspect start that way, but that might be more due to the lack of consistency in the goaltending situation, particularly now that Ilya Samsonov's out, that's further threatened. So these guys are going to be asked to tread water with so many key faces out of their lineup, and in that minefield of a division they're in, that's a tall order, AJ, in my opinion. And finally, we wind it up with talk of the Winnipeg Jets. We're going to look forward to seeing what that distribution of playing time is in the middle of the ice once they get their newcomer in the fold when Dubois finally suits up. But in the meantime, it's still a formidable top 6, and credit to the likes of Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers, who have fit in very well on the wings to give this team a dynamic look that means we have to talk much more about the wingers than we have in the past, focusing just on the middle of the ice. These are 2 wingers that, for me, are among the better ones in the league, in this division for sure, and possibly the whole league when you consider their skill sets, consistent scorers and good value plays in DFS more often than not. On the back end, Josh Morrissey is a guy that they're looking for more out of offensively. He's got 3 assists to date, a +3 on the plus-minus. He is a guy that they're expecting to drive a lot of the offense on the back end. Same can be said for Neil Pionk. He's got 4 assists, so the productivity in terms of assists is there. They haven't scored yet, and so we're looking forward to that situation to change. Conor Helibach continues to get the lion's share of the goaltending assignments, and he figures to continue to do so in the early going. But Laurent Brossoit, for me, a credible secondary option, already has picked up a win in one of his 2 starts this season. And so the goaltending in capable hands, but I do expect Helibach to play among the league leaders in terms of the starts that he has this year in the NHL.
Absolutely agree with that, Paul. The backup situation a little more stable in Winnipeg than in Tampa. So it's possible that Vasilevsky sees more starts, if only because there's less, kind of trust there. As far as the rest of this lineup goes, look, I think one thing that's important to watch is how long it's going to take Pierre-Luc Dubois to clear quarantine and protocol. Now, everything said 2 weeks, moving from the U.S. to Canada, and that he'll miss seven games over that stretch. I think if that is what happens here, there's not going to be a lot of teams that are going to want to wait to the trade deadline to make any sort of moves here. If you're going to have a guy out, if you're going to get him at the deadline and then he can't play for 2 weeks, potentially, I just think it's going to move up the time frame for this. And we may see, unless things change drastically, we may see one of our shortest, or slowest actual deadline days as more of these moves get moved up into the year.
And that's our look at the 31 clubs. We are now in the position to give a nod to our second sponsor that we are very fortunate to have, and that's Monkey Knife Fight. I've had a lot of fun getting familiar with this site, AJ. Now that your season-long fantasy hockey leagues have started, this is a great time to check out our friends at Monkey Knife Fight, the fastest-growing site in daily fantasy. The NHL and NBA are in full swing, and NFL playoffs are winding down, but been exciting, haven't they? The time is now to take advantage of a 100% instant match up to $50 on your first deposit by using the promo code WIRE. Visit monkeyknifefight.com and use promo code WIRE today. All right, buddy, in terms of final thoughts, you ticked me off with your shots against my Maple Leafs and Freddie Anderson. So it's time for me to propose a dollar bet. I'm going to go right to the throat. Leafs, Penguins. Leafs get more points than Pittsburgh this year.
I mean, I think you're probably right because your division's significantly easier than the Penguins division. I mean, we don't have walkover teams like Ottawa in our division. So, but you know what? At the end of the day, I will take that bet. You know, I'm putting myself at a disadvantage. Even if I win, I don't really get full value here because the Canadian dollar is still below the U.S. dollar. But
shots galore.
I'm willing to take that one straight up on number of points at the end of the season. I think my Penguins will come out on top.
All right. I hope we get to do the presentation in Vegas for the last couple of years. You've had my number, but I think this one's a lock for me. And I wonder what our listeners think about that, AJ. But good for you for taking it. You're a stand-up guy, and this just proves it because this was a sucker bet, pal. That wraps up our look around the league. Thanks for listening to Puckcast with Statsman and AJ, folks. It's RotoWire's signature fantasy hockey podcast with the support of our sponsor, Owner's Box. Please remember to send your comments or questions on Twitter. Follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22, and you can follow AJ at AJ Schultz 24. Don't forget, you can watch this pod on YouTube at RotoWire Hockey. As always, we invite you to listen to the podcast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. So long, everybody.